هدية مني. أبو زبيدة، خد أبو زبيدة.
After the pee break, telling the story about how when you captured Abu Zubaida and he woke up from his coma and saw the SpongeBob shirt, he knew the Americans had him.
He knew the Americans had him all right.
That was an incredible story. And then, so I remember you took him to the tarmac. They had to put him on a plane, and
right.
You didn't have a need to know. You wanted to know where he was going, but they couldn't tell you. And you found out later he was in Guantanamo.
No, I found out years later he was in Guantanamo. He ended up going to a series of secret prisons around the world.
زبيدة اتاخد واتحط في سجون حول العالم في دول عربية، مش هتبقى عارف بس هو ما قالش، انما هي في دول عربية. عاملين سجن هنا وسجن هناك عشان يكون بعيد عن، لو سجن داخل الحدود الأمريكية مشكلة، فالقانون بتاعه لا يطبق، هو بيطبقوش. القانون الإلهي واضح، بيطبقه هنا وتطبقه هناك. القانون الأمريكي جوه أمريكا له قانون، بره أمريكا مفيش قانون. بره أمريكا أنت مستباح، كل حاجة مستباح.
في بس ملاحظة. التسجيل السابق ذكر ملاحظة إنه على يعني الطائرات، فيقول يوجد في طائرات هذه CIA كأنه اللي فهمته 1000 مخدر، يعني يبدو إلى أنه بيستعملوا المخدرات عندما يقبضوا على الناس الإرهابيين، ينقلوهم إلى أماكن أخرى. يعني هيك اللي أنا فهمته. يعني
بيقول لك زمان كان موضوع الدرون ده صعب شوية، لما الدرون عشان يبعتوا درونية دي مشكلة. دلوقتي الدرون بيبعتوها تقتل أي حد شاكين فيه على طول. أي حد شاكين فيه على الأرض في مكان يعرفوا يستخدموا الدرون بيبعتوها على طول. ده اللي يقصده يعني. دلوقتي الدرون هتطلع منين؟ هيقول لك بشوية كده.
I don't know who. There's an officer who's been accused of it, but she was never prosecuted. But somebody leaked the existence of these secret prisons back in, I'm going to say it was like 2006 or 2007. The media have reported accurately on the locations of these prisons.
Are these also black sites?
Yes,
called black sites?
Also called black sites. The CIA has never acknowledged their locations. So I can't say, oh, the prison was here. The black site was there. I can't say it. But all you have to do is Google CIA black sites. It lists them. There have been multiple lawsuits coming out of this program. And in many cases, and this was always fascinating to me, these secret prisons or black sites tended to be handshake agreements between the director of the CIA and the director of whatever foreign intelligence service. In many of these cases, even the prime minister or president of the country didn't know that there was a CIA black site in his country. Isn't that amazing?
That's wild.
Talk about
السجون اللي كانوا بياخدوا فيها الناس واخطفوهم حول العالم، اللي هو بعد كده في حد في حد منهم بعد كده هم لسه هم عارفين يمين يعني، بس ما اتحطتش في البتاع ولا حاجه، اللي هي طلعت للاعلام وقالت ان في CIA عندها سجون حول العالم. اللي هي القصه بتاعت اعتقد هو القصه بتاعت ابو، كان اسمه ايه، ابو ايه مش عارف ايه الايطالي ده كان اسمه ايه، اعتقد هي دي اللي فضحتها يعني. هذه القصه كانت بتتعامل بين مدير CIA ومدير المخابرات في الدوله اللي بتعمل فيها السجن، وساعات في بعض الدول كان رئيس الدوله ورئيس الوزراء ما يعرفوش اصلا ان في سجن CIA في الدوله دي، عشان تبقى عارف انت بتتعامل مع مين.
the potential for blowback.
Right.
Just, if I were the prime minister or president of a country and I found this out, I would call the president of the United States and say, who do you think you are? You don't even have the courtesy to tell me that you want to use my country for one of your torture chambers? And in several cases, this led to the collapse of these governments. You know?
Really?
Like, what kind of president are you? That you don't even know there's a CIA black site in your country?
Right.
The Americans played you like a fool.
Mm.
Yeah. So it was very controversial at the time.
when you captured Abu Zubaida and he got shot 3 times in the stomach, the leg, and the groin, that whole story about the hospital going under a barrage of gunfire and calling in a helicopter to get you guys out of there, like, how many years has it been since you captured him?
Almost 22.
22, and he was, do you remember how old he was?
Yeah, to the best of my recollection, he was like 25 or 27, something like that. He was very young. I remember being struck by his youth. I was young at the time. I was 30, let me think, what was I? I was 37.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking, wow, this is Al-Qaeda. This is what we're so afraid of. You know? He's just a young guy. One of the most wanted men in the world.
Mm. And that was probably one of the most defining moments of your career in the CIA.
Oh,
right?
it was. It was the defining event of my life, really.
What would you say to him if you got to meet him again? And do you think there's a possibility? Would you ever want to go, like, have a meeting with him in Guantanamo and talk to him?
I'd like to. I've spoken to his attorney many times. You know, this is the reason why I'm still talking about this 22 years later. We believed at the time that Abu Zubaida was the number 3 in Al-Qaeda, right? He was identified to us by the White House as the number 3 in Al-Qaeda. He was identified in Time magazine, which was a major publication at the time, as the number 3 in Al-Qaeda. We knew that he had founded Al-Qaeda's safe house in Peshawar, Pakistan, called the House of Martyrs. And that's where people would stay as they were preparing to go to Afghanistan for training, terrorist training. Not only did he establish the House of Martyrs, he also established Al-Qaeda's 2 training camps in southern Afghanistan, in Helmand province and in Kandahar. So we knew this was a bad guy. If you were already in the fight and you wanted to go home, Abu Zubaida would forge a passport and get you tickets home. If you wanted to join the fight, he would get you to the House of Martyrs and then into Afghanistan. And then from Afghanistan, he would get you to wherever it was you were supposed to go. So this was a bad guy, but he was not the number 3 in Al-Qaeda.
No.
He had never joined Al-Qaeda. He talked about it, but he had never sworn an oath to Osama bin Laden. So he was viewed by bin Laden and by the Al-Qaeda leadership as an independent, sort of a friendly independent.
Like a guy like that bin Laden would give him a wink and a nod of approval. Like,
right.
Okay.
Now, the bigger problem for us at the CIA, and we didn't know this until 2005, was that Abu Zubaida had a first cousin who was also named Abu Zubaida. And so that Abu Zubaida was in Montana. And then when 9/11 hit, he said, oh shit, I got to get out of here. And he ran to Jordan. So our sister agencies are picking up intelligence here, there, and everywhere, out of the air, out of the sky. Abu Zubaida is in Amman, he's doing this. Abu Zubaida's in Pakistan, he's doing that. Abu Zubaida's in Afghanistan. Abu Zubaida's in Syria. It's like, oh my God, this is a terrorist Superman, right? But it was 2 of them. 2 of them. We didn't know. And so we thought, well, if he's able to move from country to country and he's plotting all these different operations, we got to stop this guy. We know that bin Laden's number 1. We know that Ayman al-Zawahiri is number 2. Mohammed Atef was number 3. We killed him in October of 2001. So that means Abu Zubaida must be the number 3, right? Because he's out doing all this different stuff.
Right.
And it turned out he wasn't, actually. So, You know, this is what makes this a sad story, and this is why I would be willing to talk to Abu Zubaida, and this is why I am willing to talk to his attorney, because first of all, he was not the terrorist Superman we thought he was. He was a bad guy. So if he was a bad guy, he should have been charged with a crime and put on trial, as the Constitution says that he should. And he should face his accusers in a court of law. Well, we know from the Senate torture report that the CIA will never permit him to be charged in a court of law. And in fact, the torture report tells us that the CIA has made a policy decision that Abu Zubaida will never leave Guantanamo, ever. And when he does die, eventually, he'll be cremated and his ashes thrown into the Caribbean. So remember, this is a guy who has never been charged with a crime. So why hold him? Right?
What is their reasoning, or what is their explanation for that?
They fucked it up, and they can't let any more get out into the public. Kiriaka was bad enough, blabbing that, you know, we tortured him. But then the Senate torture report actually lays it all out, blow by blow by blow, what they did to him. And then if we release him, what, he's going to be on every TV channel in the world talking about the torture that he underwent at the hands of the Americans. The CIA can't allow that.
طيب ابو زبيده هم طالعين يجروا وراه عشان تعرفوا ان هم معلوماتهم ضعيفه. ابو زبيده ده كان راجل هم كانوا بيقولوا ان هو رقم 3 في القاعده، ورئيس امريكا قال لهم ده رقم 3 في القاعده، وكل الناس بتقول لهم ده رقم 3 في القاعده، وهم جاي لهم معلومات ان هو رقم 3 في القاعده، فراحوا خدوه. وبعدين اذا بيهم يكتشفوا الراجل صغير 27 سنه 26 سنه. شغلته كانت ان هو لو انت عاوز تروح للقاعده بتروح له هو في افغانستان الاول، عامل بيت كده محدش يعرفه، مكان يعني بيحضرك تريح، يظبط لك الدنيا ويدخلك افغانستان. لو انت قاعد جوه افغانستان وعاوز تروح بلدك، عاوز تاخد فتره اجازه ولا حاجه، بتروح عنده، وبعدين هو يظبط لك الدنيا ويظبط لك التيكيتات ويظبط لك، وممكن يضرب لك باسبور ويضرب لك كل حاجه.
محطه مخابرات ليهم.
لا مش هو بقى، هم كانوا فاكرين انه مخابرات، بس هو طلع ان هو
انا اقصد لوجستي، بيساعد في كل
حاجه لوجستيه، بيدخل الناس ويطلع الناس، بس ما بلوش حاجه، مش رقم 3 ولا هو تبع القاعده ولا معاهم ولا حاجه. ادي حاجه، ادي الموضوع الاولاني، ملوش دعوه بالتخطيط يعني. الموضوع الثاني، معلومات جات لهم كل فلان فلاني جاي يقول لهم انا كنت معدي على ابو زبيده، معدل ابو زبيده، فقال لك ابو زبيده رقم 3، ما كانش رقم 3. ادي الموضوع الاولاني. الموضوع الثاني، كان في 2 ابو زبيده، واحد منهم كان في امريكا، وبعدين لما حصل 11 سبتمبر سافر وراح الاردن، وهم الاثنين دول قرايب، ده اسمه ابو زبيده ده اسمه ابو زبيده. فكان بيجي لهم معلومات للسي اي اي، ابو زبيده عمل، ابو زبيده راح.
ده النيك نيم يا ادم، نيك نيم مش اسمه كده.
ابو زبيده راح، ابو زبيده جه، ابو زبيده عمل، فقال لك ابو زبيده ده بقى كله قال لك ابو زبيده ده السوبر مان بن لادن مستخبي في الكهف، وابو زبيده في الاردن، ابو زبيده قال لك ابو زبيده رقم 3، راحوا جابوه وبعدين اكتشفوا في الاخر ملوش حاجه. المهم دخلوه في جوانتانامو، والراجل بيقول لك، الراجل كل اللي كان بيعملوه ان هو بيدخل حاجات ويطلع الحاجات والكلام ده كله، ومالوش اي علاقه بالقاعده كتنظيم او كحرب او الكلام ده. راجل بيستفيد يعني، شغال في النص كده، مقاول انفار. المهم بيقول لك عمرهم ما يدخلوه محكمه. قال لك ده راجل يعني ممكن يدخل محكمه، نشوف هو عمل ايه بتاع. قال لك السي اي اتخذ القرار، الراجل ده لا هيطلع ولا يدخل محكمه ولا اي حاجه، وسيموت في جوانتانامو، لانهم عذبوه وطلعوا منه شويه حاجات، والموضوع طلع، والراجل هيطلع بعد كده على اعلام واتكلم، فهيموتوه خارج راجل سائي، هيموتوه خارج اطار القانون، لانه هيتكلم بقى، يبدا يتكلم كتير يعني. كنت عارف القصه دي يا ابو انس؟
لا هم يعني في ذكر انه شغلة يعني قال أنك يعني يعني أنت لا تعرف حقا يعني أنت لا تعرف حتى أن في أن هناك موقعا أسودا، هيك ذكر موقعا أسودا لوكالة الاستخبارات المركزية في بلدك. إذن في كل البلدان يوجد موقع أسود للCIA، هكذا ذكر. بعدين قال إلى أنه على أبو زبيدة، اللي فهمت يعني أنه هو كان يعني صغير بين 25 أو 27 سنة عمره، وكان يعني كانوا يعتقدوا في ذلك أنه هو أهم الرجال يعني المطلوبين في العالم. فقال أنه كمان كانوا يعتقدوا أنه هو الرجل الثالث في تنظيم القاعدة، ولكن يعني ذكر كمان أنه أنه كان يعني قام بتأسيس معسكرين تدريبين للقاعدة في جنوب أفغانستان، وتحديدا ذكر إقليم هلمند وقندهار. لذلك يعني هيك ذكر لذا كنا نعلم أن هذا الرجل شرير، هيك وصفه شرير. وبعدين قال لأنه أبو زبيدة يعني مختص في تزوير يعني جواز السفر والتذاكر، ويعني الريتيرن تيكت، هيك اللي أنا فهمته. وكذا يعني في حالة إذا الشخص أراد الانضمام إلى القاعدة أو إلى القتال. فيعني هذه الأمور اللي أنا جذبت انتباهي يعني بعدين ذكر يعني انه بن لادن هو كان الرجل الاول، وبعدين الظواهر الثاني، وبعدين ذكر محمد عاطف هو الرجل الثالث. هم كانوا يعتقدوا الى انه ابو زبيدة الرجل الثالث، ولكن يعني اكتشفوا لانه ابو زبيدة يعني كان هو اللي كما ذكرت انه كان يعني هو اسس المعسكرين او التدريبين في القتال في افغانستان يعني. فهذا اللي شد انتباهي، وحقيقة يعني أنك لا تعرف إذا أن هناك موقعا أسودا لوكالة الاستخبارات المركزية CIA في بلدك.
الموقع الاسود ده بقى ده قصه ثانيه بحكي لكم عليه. الموقع الاسود ده قصه ثانيه. المهم ان تبقى عارف انه انت وانت بتعمل ثوره في اي مكان، مخابرات امريكيه شغاله وطالعه وجايه، وفي ناس وقاعدين في مكان ما انت ما تعرفوش، وتنزلوا من حتت معينه بالتعاون مع الناس اللي انت معاهم. لازم تبقى فاهم هذه القصه. السايت الاسود ده هتجيبه ازاي ولا هتشوفه ازاي ده موضوع تاني. المهم انا بديك تفاصيل انت بتتعامل مع ايه. كمل الراجل وبيكلمك عن بقيه
What is going on with the other guy at Guantanamo who was in charge with orchestrating everything?
That's a different case. That is Khalid Sheikh Mohammed.
Yes, that's
Khalid Sheikh Mohammed is the earthly incarnation of Satan. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed is a perplexing character because, he was an exchange student here. He went to some state university in North Carolina, lived with an American family. He's utterly Americanized. But he self-radicalized when he went back to the Middle East or to Pakistan. He devoted many, many years to hatching plans or plots to kill as many Americans as he possibly could. Well before 9/11, there's something you and I have discussed in the past called the Bojinka plot. So the Bojinka plot was an idea that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed came up with in the Philippines to hijack, it was something like 10 747s, and to fly them all into buildings up and down the west coast of the United States. Wow. He actually had a chance of that plot working. And he had all these papers laid out, maps, drawings, notes, and he left his apartment, and housekeeping went in to the apartment to clean the apartment. And the housekeeper is looking at this like, what the heck is all this stuff? I better call the police. She calls the police. They said, this looks like the plans for a terrorist attack. And so they set out to look for him. They didn't know his name. They only knew him by the name Mukhtar, which I think you and I have talked about in the past. But he escaped. He escaped from Manila. So we knew that there was this very bad dude out there known as Mukhtar, who was plotting this massive terrorist attack that would take place on the West Coast. So we knew that Mukhtar was involved in the planning for 9/11. As it turned out, 9/11 was completely his idea. But we didn't know who he was. We didn't know what his real name was. And that was one of the two most important things that Abu Zubaida gave us in his FBI interviews. Oh, wow. Yeah. He actually laughed at the FBI agent, Ali Sufan, when Ali said, we didn't know who Mukhtar was. He's like, how can you not know who Mukhtar was? He's the most dangerous man in the world. And he said, we don't know. Oh, it's Khalid Sheikh Mohammed.
Was he the guy who was in the apartment that apparently there was some Saudi intelligence that were tracking him or knew about him that they didn't tell us about?
Yes, that was one of the side stories to this. There's a book by, to the best of my recollection, it was a couple of journalists from the Los Angeles Times, and they said that the CIA had a human source that led them to Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. I was already working on Iraq at the time, so I wasn't involved in this thing. But it was a human source. It was not an intercept, and it was not a foreign service that led us to Khalid Sheikh Mohammed.
And the human source was Saudi?
I don't have any idea. The Saudis, listen, you can't trust the Saudis as far as you could pick one of them up and throw them. And this is a beef that I've had with the Saudi government and the Saudi royal family really all of my adult life. We profess to have this special relationship with the Saudis, and they profess a special relationship with us. It's just not true. We don't like each other. We don't trust each other, but we buy their oil and they buy our weapons. It's as simple as that. It's transactional. When we captured Abu Zubaida, we also captured his diary, or what's known as his diary.
Right.
It's not really a diary, but you and I have talked about that as well. Well, in this diary, he also had the names and cell phone numbers of 2 members of the Saudi royal family. And then when we approached the Saudis and we asked them, what's this all about? Next thing you know, one of them goes into the desert to go camping, and he dies of thirst. Can you imagine?
اوبا خش يا بونس.
اعطيني بس فرصة، خليني اركز شوي.
طيب على ما تركز. بيحكي قصة خالد شيخ محمد. خالد شيخ محمد ده قصته ان هو كان في الفلبين، وكان بيحاول يعمل نفس القصة بتاعت سبتمبر 11 دي من الفلبين، ولكن حد كان معاه يعني ما كانش واخد باله من السكيورتي ولا حاجه. المهم البلان بتاعه زي ما تقول مسكوه، فالشرطه الفلبينيه مسكته عاوز يسلمه الامريكان، بس هو هرب. وما كانوش يعرفوا ان اسمه خالد شيخ محمد، كانوا فاكرين اسمه مختار. فهم كانوا عارفين ان في واحد بيحاول يعمل حاجه زي كده، ولكن ما يعرفوش اسمه. هو عارفين في واحد اسمه مختار وخلاص، والراجل ده كان في الفلبين ومشى، ما يعرفوش هو اي اي معلومات عنه، لانه اكتشف انه كان داخل بجواز مزور وحاجه. والفلبين الدنيا هو يعني. وبعدين هو كان بقى في امريكا فتره 11 سبتمبر دي. اللي اداهم اسم خالد شيخ محمد كان ابو زبيده. لما مسكوا ابو زبيده ده بعد التعذيب اداهم الاسم ده. فقال لهم، وكان بيضحك عليهم بيقول لهم انتوا بعد في الريسورسز دي كلها مش عارفين ان مختار ده وخالد شيخ محمد. المهم بيقول انه السعوديين لا تثق فيهم في اي شيء، لا تثق في السعوديين في اي شيء، ما بيعرفوش يعملوا حاجه خالص، المخابرات بتاعتهم ضحك يعني. وبيقول لما مسكوا ابو زبيده، مسكوا التليفونات اللي كان بيعملها والمش عارف ايه والورق الكلام ده كله، لقوا منها 2 من آل سعود. لقوا منها 2 من آل سعود. فكلموا السعوديه، قالوا لهم مين دول؟ بقول لك واحد منهم اول ما الكلام ده حصل، واحد منهم قالوا لهم ده بيعمل كامبينج في الصحراء وبعدين مات. تقريبا آل سعود قتلوه، حد من الاسره المالكه السعوديه. حد يشوف لنا اسم بقى الامير ده. اول ما قالوا له ماشي هنجيبه لكم. وبعدين الراجل ده راح كان بيعمل كامبينج في الصحراء وبعدين مات من الثيرست.
Guys of thirst. The other one was killed in a spectacular one-car accident.
اتقتل في حادثة عربية. الاتنين اللي كان اساميهم هناك عند ابو زبيدة.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
It's so crazy. It's like at the level of these nations, right? Like you have all these different levels of society, and at the very, very top, you have the nation states, and above that, there's nothing.
Mm-hmm.
It's like lawless. It's the wild, wild west. When you're looking at America, Saudi Arabia, Iran, it's Russia, China, it's like, it's anarchy.
Yeah, it is. It's anarchy. That's why I lament the death of modern diplomacy, you know? Because I think that as a matter of national policy, we should always just let the diplomats do their job. Not send carrier battle groups, you know, here and there and everywhere, and with threats of, you know, why I oughta, that kind of thing. You better not cross this line or you're going to get it.
Right.
We should let the diplomats do their jobs. And this whole thing about, you know, getting back to Ukraine for a moment.
Yes, I wanted to go into that.
This whole thing about, oh, that evil Putin, he's crazy. He just invaded out of the clear blue sky. Like, are you joking? Like, does nobody know the history of U.S. involvement in Ukraine?
Right.
The Maidan uprising and
Orange Revolution.
The Orange Revolution and Hillary Clinton involved in changing governments, and like, does nobody pay attention to these things? So this is.
Have you ever met Putin?
No, but I'll tell you a funny story about that. I was invited to a dinner in Moscow to celebrate the 15th anniversary of the founding of RT, Russia Today, the big television network. And they sent me, it was actually it's the first time in my life I ever received an engraved invitation, right? Like it's the 50s. And all expenses paid. They're going to fly me to Moscow and they're going to put me in this hotel and I'm going to be at this VIP table of Americans. And so I had just gotten out of prison. So I went to the judge and I said, hey, I'm invited to this really important dinner in Moscow. And she says, absolutely not. So I wasn't allowed to go.
Well, my first question once I get out of prison for whistleblowing against the CIA.
To go to Moscow. So this was the dinner where General Flynn went, Mike Flynn, and Jesse Ventura, and Jill Stein, and Mike Maloof, and all these like important outsiders all sitting at the same table. And then Putin walks in and sits down and shakes hands, and they all get a big picture together, and then Putin leaves. So at first I was like, damn it! It's like the only chance in my life I would ever have to meet Vladimir Putin. And then afterwards, you know, they arrest Mike Flynn, they open a grand jury on some of these other guys, they called Jill Stein a traitor. I'm so glad I didn't go to that dinner. Oh my God, I have enough problems in my life. Do you think...
مع بوتين بيقول ان جاله انفيتيشن انه يروح في حفله في موسكو قبل الحرب الروسيه الاوكرانيه، وكان هيروح ولكن لما كلم حد معاه في اسرائيل قال له ممنوع. المهم كل الناس اللي راحوا الحكومه الامريكيه دلوقتي بتجري وراهم، جيل ستاين ومايكل فلين ومش عارف مين.
بس في ملاحظة على التسجيل السابق على خالد شيخ. أنا اللي فهمته إلى أنه يعني كما ذكر أنه خالد شيخ هو يعني تجسيد أو التجسيد الأرضي للشيطان، هذا الذي ذكره يعني. فيقول كيف؟
بيقول لك يعني خالد ابو زبيده ده كان راجل عبيط، انما خالد شيخ محمد ده كان بالنسبه له هو شر.
خالد شيخ محمد العقل المدبر، very intelligent man، عملنا غرفه عليه.
فذكر يعني على محمد شيخ محمد، ذكر إلى أنه شخصية محيرة. فهو يعني كأنه اللي فهمت أنه ذهب إلى إحدى جامعات في ولاية كارولينا الشمالية وعاش مع أسرة أمريكية. فبعدين ذكر إلى أنه بعد ذلك أصبح متطرف. أنا اللي بعرفه عن محمد شيخ لأنه هو باكستاني من مواليد الكويت. يعني المهم أستطرد إيش اللي ذكروا كمان، أنه كان متطرف، بعدين عاد إلى الشرق الأوسط من أمريكا، عاد إلى الشرق الأوسط أو باكستان، هيك اللي ذكر. المهم بعدين كأنه ذكر إلى أنه كان يعني كان يخطط ل أو يعني إلى أنه لقتل أو يعني يعمل مؤامرات لقتل أكبر عدد ممكن من الأمريكيين قبل أحداث سبتمبر. فهو اللي فهمته أنه كانوا يناقشوه هذا بعد اعتقاله في غوانتنامو يعني. يعني في أثناء مناقشته يعني اللي فهمته أنه ذكر على شيء يسمى كأنه مؤامرة، كأنه ذكرها بوجينكا. فهذه المؤامرة يقول إلى أنه اللي ابتكرها هو محمد الشيخ يعني. فما بعرف إيش هذه مؤامرة بوجينكا، أكيد إلها تاريخ يعني. فالمهم ذكر الفلبين يعني أنه كان في اختطاف يعني لطائرة، ذكر اسمها طرازها، أنه
لا قال لك كان بيخطط، ما عملش، كان بيخطط واكتشف يعني حد اكتشف.
صححني يعني أنا يعني بذكر بعض الملاحظات. المهم بعدين ذكر على شيء انه هو اسمه ما كانوا عارفين الى انه هو اسمه محمد شيخ. كان يعني هم كانوا عارفين انه في شيء اسمه او يعني شخص اسمه مختار، هذا اللي في الفلبين او المهم. فبعدين ذكر الى انه فكرة 11 سبتمبر نفس الفكرة اللي كان يفكر فيها محمد شيخ يعني. وبعدين قال أكد إنه ما كانوا عارفين إنه اسمه يعني خالد محمد شيخ أو خالد شيخ محمد يعني. فالمهم بعدين ذكر على موضوع أجهزة الاستخبارات السعودية، إنه كانوا بعض أجهزة الاستخبارات السعودية كانت تتعقبه. المهم
لا، هو
ذكر شيء.
قال هذا الكلام غير صحيح، مفيش حد مثل أجهزة المخابرات السعودية ولا حاجة. قال هو في واحد بعد كده قال لهم أنا يعني كان عندي إحساس كده، بس ما ده مش سعودي. هو المعلومة اللي طلعت إن هو كان تبع السعودية، اللي هو ما قال لك لا مش مخابرات السعودية ولا حاجة، ده واحد عادي خالص. بعد كده قال لهم، بس بعد ما كانوا جابوه يعني.
المهم ذكر شغلة، ذكر إنه CIA كان لديها، هذا قبل ما يعرفوا اسمه، قبل يعني كان لديها مصدر بشري هيك يعني، هيك ذكر. فالمهم يعني مش من خلال يعني اللي فهمته المصدر يعني البشري مش يعني ليس هو عملية تنصت أو اتصال مع، يعني إنه مصدر بشري هيك، وهم مش عارفين في ذلك الوقت محمد شيخ. فبعدين ذكر على هذول السعوديين، قال إنه لا يمكنك أن تثق في السعوديين بقدر ما يمكن أن تلتقط أحدهم هيك أو وترميه هيك، اللي فهمته. وهذه مشكلة كانت بيني وبين الحكومة السعودية والعائلة السعودية أو العائلة المالكة السعودية طوال حياتي. فهو يقول ندعي أن لدينا علاقة خاصة مع السعوديين وهم يزعمون أن لديهم علاقة خاصة بنا. هنا بيت القصيد ذكر هذا ليس صحيحا، نحن لا نحب بعضنا البعض ولا نثق في بعضنا البعض، لكننا نشتري نفطهم وهم يشترون أسلحتنا، الأمر بهذه البساطة. يعني هاي وبعدين ذكر إلى أنه مسكوا يعني مذكرات، أو هو قال يعني عبارة عن مذكرة يعني، أو فيها أسماء وأرقام هواتف محمولة لعضوين من العائلة السعودية يعني. هذا اللي أنا التقطت منه يعني. المهم بس أنا في عندي 10 دقائق عندي وقت الصلاة بس.
طيب
اسمحوا لي يعني.
نكمل، أنت اتفضل. دلوقتي هيتكلم على لأنه كان في السفارة الأمريكية في الشرق الأوسط قعد فترة طويلة. هيكلمك على موضوع إسرائيل وفلسطين والأردن وإيران.
And by 2005, they decided, we got to get out of here. There's too many Palestinians here.
What is like the balance geopolitically of Israel, Iran, Saudi Arabia when it comes to this? Like,
well, Hamas, that's a great question. And Hamas made a statement the other day, just in the past week or so, that what finally convinced them to launch this thing was the closeness of a diplomatic agreement between Israel and Saudi Arabia.
Right.
They had seen history just slipping through their hands, right? With these Abraham Accords that Donald Trump negotiated, while a great victory for Israel and for the Gulf Arabs, it was a punch in the throat to the Palestinians. Remember, Trump in the campaign said, I'll fix the Israeli-Palestinian problem in one day. Yeah, you do that by fucking the Palestinians. I mean, you didn't fix it. You just literally gave the Israelis everything that they wanted. That's not fixing it. Right. It only made it worse. So there was this little heyday that lasted from, 2019 to October the 7th, where Israel opens relations with Morocco and Sudan and the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, and I think I'm leaving somebody out, and they're this close to relations with Saudi Arabia, which is going to be the crown jewel, really, of Israeli foreign policy. And Hamas just decided.
Iran does not want Saudi Arabia and Israel to have a relationship.
Absolutely not.
Why
and the
not?
Iranians, because Iran's greatest enemy is Israel. Now, see, this is part of the thing that makes this all so complicated.
Right.
Iran and Saudi Arabia hate each other, like to the death.
Mm-hmm.
They hate each other. Going back to 1979, the Iranian Revolution was in February of 79. In March, I think it was March or April of 79, that's when the Hajj took place in Mecca and Medina, right? The Iranians infiltrated the Hajj, and they took over the Holy Kaaba, the big black granite cube that holds the rock that God gave Muhammad. So more than 1,000 people were killed in the ensuing the takeover, and then the reaction from the Saudi military, and the Saudis broke relations with Iran, and it was decades before they put it back together again.
Mm-hmm.
So the Saudis, even during the Iran-Iraq war, the Saudis supported Iran because they were so afraid of. I'm sorry, the Saudis supported Iraq because they were so afraid of Iran.
Oh, right.
And Saudi Arabia has a very large Shia Muslim population in its eastern province. Saudi Arabia is a Sunni Muslim country. Iran is a Shia Muslim country. But this little sliver of Saudi Arabia is Shia. And that just happens to be where all the oil is. Right? So they are perfectly happy to execute as many Shia Muslim Saudis as they need to make sure that everything remains calm. And they do it a lot. They kill a lot of people there in the eastern province.
الحاجات دي تاريخية تقريبا، يعني مفيش حاجة جديدة. بعد الثورة الخمينية في 79 كان في الحج، الإيرانيين دخلوا واتقتل 1000 وحاولوا يعملوا يتيك اوفر الحج، يعني واتقتل 1000 سنة 79 في الحج بتاع سنة 79 بعد الثورة الإيرانية. وبعدين اتقطعت العلاقات بين السعودية وإيران، وبعدين رجعت تاني. والسعودية في الأول كانت مع صدام حسين ضد إيران.
So they've got this bad relationship with the Iranians, goes back decades. And then the Chinese come in, beginning of this year, and they say, listen, we don't have a dog in this fight, but we like you, and we like you. And we think you guys should get together, and it would be good for peace, and we can fuck the Americans this way. And so, what do you say? We broker peace between you, and the Saudis send an ambassador to Tehran.
بيقول لك أنا وجهة نظر CIA أن الصين هي اللي شغالة في القصة دي وليست روسيا. الصين كلمت السعودية وكلمت إيران، قالت لهم إحنا محتاجينكم انتوا الاتنين وما تقلقوش من موضوع أمريكا، محدش هيعرف يعمل لكم حاجة في مقابل إن انتوا تظبطونا في المنطقة، لأن الأمريكان مش هيحموكم.
And the Iranians send an ambassador to Riyadh. And before we even realize what's going on, they announce the resumption of diplomatic relations. And we're like, oh my God, that's our sphere of influence. And the Chinese just screwed us out of it. So then we're like, okay, well now what we're going to do is we're going to get the Saudis to recognize Israel.
الرد الأمريكي، طيب لو الصين عاوزة تدخل في الشرق الأوسط وتظبط العلاقات بين إيران والسعودية من أجل مصلحتها الشخصية وتدخل بقى وتهيس، الأمريكان بالتعاون مع بن سلمان وبن سلمان أكيد راح لهم هذه القصة، سيعلنوا أنهم سيعترفوا بدولة إسرائيل ويظبطوا العلاقات مع إسرائيل بدعم أمريكي علشان يضربوا الصينيين. اللي شفت، عشان بقول لك دايما القصة الكبيرة بين أمريكا وروسيا والصين، اللي في النص دول بيلعبوا تحتهم. وبعدين لما جم يظبطوا العلاقات بين السعودية وإسرائيل قامت حماس ضربة.
And that'll screw the Iranians, and it'll screw the Chinese, because the Chinese won't have played a role in it. And so we start leaking these stories to the press. Oh, we're close. The Saudis and the Israelis, it's going to happen. It's coming together. Just another couple of weeks. There's going to be a big visit. The Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia is going to go to Jerusalem. And Hamas says, oh, no, he doesn't. And they launch the attack.
But doesn't I'm sorry, Iran is Shia. Aren't the main population of Hamas?
That's a very important point. I'm glad you raised that.
They're Sunnis.
Hamas is Sunni, 100% Sunni. Right? So why would they even speak to the Iranians?
Yes.
Because that's how much they hate the Israelis.
So it's...
they say in Arabic, the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Right.
They mean it.
Right.
They mean that. And so the Iranians have long helped to finance Hamas just because they hate the Israelis so much that at least that is going to keep the Israelis bogged down and will serve to weaken them and bleed them a little bit. That's why the Iranians support Syria. Bashar al-Assad is not, he's part of a sect that's neither Sunni nor Shia. But he gets great help from the Iranians. And the Qataris. The Qataris are Sunni. They're not just Sunni, but they're Wahhabi Sunni, just like the Saudis are. And they have very close relations with Iran because the Qataris hate the Israelis too.
What is Jordan's role in all this?
Poor Jordan.
I had a quick aside. I had a guy in here a couple weeks ago who was part of an Army Ranger camp who was in Jordan, and he was telling me this crazy story about they were training Jordanians to kill.
Uh-huh.
And he was saying that there's only 2 people Jordanians kill. I forget the first one, but the second one was Israelis. He was saying that Jordanians hated Israelis.
Wow.
And he was like, it wasn't our written objective. He's like, but we knew we were just training them to kill Israelis. I was like, that sounds crazy.
It's not quite that clear cut.
And he was also telling me stories about how the Mossad, when they're training the Mossad, they literally send them on missions to break into Jordan and like do little operations and steal things or do things and go back and navigate back into Israel.
Yes,
as part of their training.
الموساد لما بيجي بيدرب العملاء بتوعه قبل ما يعملوا عملية مهمة بيدربهم في الأردن. الراجل بتاع الموساد عاوزين يدربوه إن هو يدخل يخترق يعمل عملية ويرجع. عاوز يتدرب بقى يعمل عملية بيبعتوه الأردن. يوم داخل يخترق من غير ما بتوع الأردن يشوفوه ويدخل ويقعد محدش يشوفه ويقوم رايح مثلا ما يقتلش حد ولا يعمل حاجة ولكن يقول لهم إن يأكد إن هو وصل المكان اللي هو التارجت اللي هو عاوز يوصل له ده عشان يعمل ويقوم طالع تاني. بيعملوا التجربة دي في الأردن.
Exercises. The Israelis actually had to apologize to the Jordanian government because as part of their training exercises, they would move the border fence. So there's a fence dividing Israel and Israel and Jordan.
Right.
And they would move it only a couple inches at a time so that nobody would notice. Well, then over time, it's moved like 300 feet into Jordan. And they had to apologize and say, listen, we stole 300 feet of your territory. We'll give it back to you. We're going to move the fence back. Jordan is very complicated.
Yeah. I don't mean to muddy the water here.
No, that's okay. This is all apropos of the original issue. Jordan is fully 50% Palestinian, right? These are all refugees from the Nakba from 1940, 47, 48. They've never been treated as full Jordanian citizens. Even their passports are a different color. So if you're an ethnic Palestinian, you're not really Jordanian. You have most of the rights that a Jordanian has, but you can't vote, right?
Wow.
Yeah, and you don't have the same economic opportunities that Jordanians have. There's a huge difference, too, between Jordanians and the Jordanian royal family. The Jordanian royal family, they're essentially all Americans, right? The king owns a condo in Georgetown at the Four Seasons.
You were saying you saw him at the mall or something?
I saw him walking around the mall at Tyson's Corner. You're like, oh my God, that's King Abdullah. They can't be any more pro-American. Like, right. I mean that quite literally. There's nothing more that they can do. That...
من وجهة نظر الCIA الأردن تقريبا كأنه واحد أمريكي. ما فيش حاجة يقدر يعملها تاني عشان يساعد الأمريكان. لا يوجد شيء ممكن ملك الأردن يعمله تاني لمساعدة الأمريكان. عامل كل حاجة.
It's going to make them any more pro-American. But that's not the average Jordanian. They don't like us and they don't trust us because we've screwed them so many times in the past. At the same time, deep down, they're afraid of the Palestinians. In 1968, there was a Palestinian group called Black September. And Black September decided, well, if we can't have Palestine with Jerusalem as its capital.
حاجة حصلت في سنة دي الحاجات المهمة بالنسبة للسعودية. خلي بالك 68 سبتمبر الأسود الفلسطينيين قالوا لو احنا مش هناخد فلسطين يبقى ناخد الأردن ووصلوا إلى غاية سلم الرئاسة بتاع ملك الأردن. عشان كده ملك الأردن عنده مشكلة مع الفلسطينيين لأنه عارف إن هم يعني في وقت ما من الأوقات ما هماش ممكن ياخدوا منه الدولة.
We're going to take Jordan with Amman as its capital. And they were literally fighting on the steps of the royal palace when the Jordanian military finally pushed them back. Thousands of people were killed in that fight. And King Hussein, the current king's father, said at the time that the Palestinians have to be cowed. And so you don't allow them to integrate into society. Because if you do, they're going to try to overthrow the royal family and take the country again because they can't have their own country. So there's this resentment that's bubbling just beneath the surface.
Right.
You know, on paper, it looks like, oh, well, you know, Jordan and Israel, they've been at peace for 30 years and they travel back and forth and everybody's, you know, kumbaya. That's just not true. They don't like each other.
Right.
They realize it's a dangerous neighborhood. They have to live with each other. But I think your friend's observations are mostly correct.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't think that, well, let me rephrase that. Every once in a while, and by that I mean every decade or decade and a half, a Jordanian soldier will go nuts and just open fire on the Israelis.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll usually kill, you know, a couple. And then the Jordanians apologize and they offer money to the family of the dead Israelis and the Israelis accept the apology and then they pretend everything's fine. But it's because things are bubbling up just beneath the surface.
It's such a crazy part of the world.
It is. It's fascinating. From when I was 15 years old, all I wanted to do was live in the Middle East and work on the Middle East.
And you lived there for a total of how long?
I was there for 5 years.
And how long were you in Greece?
2 years.
2 years. So, okay, going back to the balance of power over there, and it seems like a big sort of proxy war between America and China, really. I mean, if you look at it.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Yes.
When it comes to Iran and Hamas and Saudi Arabia and Israel, where does Russia fit into this? Because Russia and Iran are close, questions. Right?
Yeah, Russia and Iran are close. I'm going to go back to 1995 when I was living in Bahrain. I was the senior economic officer at the American Embassy. And this was the heyday of the Arab-Israeli peace process. And so the United Nations announced peace talks between Israel and the Arab countries on the environment, and they were going to be held in Bahrain. So I was a delegate to the Arab-Israeli peace talks on the environment. What my instructions were the day we received the invitation from the State Department to deliver to the way it is, we're a superpower and Russia was a superpower. So we got this invitation and I was supposed to go with the Russian economic officer to the Minister of Foreign Affairs and say, Your Excellency, on behalf of the governments of the United States and the Russian Republic, we hereby invite you to host the next round of the Arab-Israeli peace talks. These talks will be on the environment, right? It's this stupid diplomatic formality. Mm-hmm. So I get the invitation. I called my Russian counterpart, Andre. Good guy. His wife was an Olympic figure skater. I still remember. Nice guy. A little lazy, but fun. And I said, Andre, I got my instructions today. And he said, yeah, I got my instructions. I said, okay, I'll call over to the foreign minister's office and make the appointment for us. So I did. And they gave me an appointment for the next day. And so just as I was going to leave to go pick him up and then go to the foreign ministry, I get instructions from state. Don't pick up the Russian. Just do it yourself. And I'm like, why? This is a joint U.S.-Russian peace initiative. So I went to the ambassador and I said, Ambassador, I got this odd instruction from state. He said, yeah, I saw that. I said, what do I do? He said, well, you got to ignore the Russian. I said, that's going to make for an awkward lunch. So I drove over to the foreign minister's office. I went to see him and I said, Your Excellency, on behalf of the United States government, I would like to formally invite you, blah, blah, blah. My phone is blowing up at the time. Well, my phone, it was like this big. So, the size of a shoebox. And Andre's like, where are you? And I said, Andre, I am so sorry. And I explained what happened. He's like, come on, man. Like, what the fuck? I said, I'm sorry. It's some kind of power play in Washington. I don't even know what to say to you. I'm sorry.
مكان الملحق في السفارة الأمريكية في البحرين. كانت ساعتها المباحثات بتاعة السلام العربية الإسرائيلية، وكان المفروض يتعمل في البحرين، وكان المفروض هو يروح مندوب للسفارة الأمريكية، وأمريكا وروسيا هم اللي داعين ليه. فهو كلم الملحق بتاع السفارة الروسية، وكانوا المفروض الراجل الأمريكي يعدي عليه، هياخده في العربية وهيروحوا سوا لمقر الاجتماع، ويبدأوا الاجتماع بيقولوا مندوبا عن حكومة أمريكا ندعوكم لبدء الاجتماع. اتفق معه كل حاجة، وبعدين جاله كوميونيكيشن بالليل من وزارة الخارجية الأمريكية، قالوا له ما تروحش تجيب الروسي، تروح لوحدك. قال لهم يا جماعة اتفقت؟ قالوا له أمر، تروح لوحدك. كلم السفير قال له شفت اللي حصل؟ قال له قال ولا معرفش السبب. فراح لوحده الصبح، وهم كان متفق ان هو هيعدي على الروسي، وعمل القصه دي. وبعدين بعد ما خلص الروسي بيكلمه له انت فين؟ قال له انا معرفش اقول لك ايه. هو عاوز يفهمك يعني ان القصه بتاعت الحرب الامريكيه الروسيه دي زمان، قال لك دي حاجه زي ما لناش دعوه بيه، يعني ما يتعرفش عليك، خليه بعيد. هذه القصه سنه 95.
And after that, he was, very cold to me, and he knew it wasn't me. But the whole point of this is, historically, really since the end of the Second World War, the Middle East is ours. It's not the Russians or the Chinese. It's ours. And so that's why we are so apoplectic about the Russians having troops in Syria, because Syria is part of the Middle East and the Middle East is ours. And now all of a sudden the Chinese are involved, negotiating peace between the Iranians and the Saudis. Like, where'd that come from? We're already worried about the Russians in Syria, and now we got to worry about the Chinese in Saudi Arabia?
Right.
Another thing. The last time I was in Djibouti is a little tiny country in Africa.
ركز. جيبوتي.
Right. The only reason I went to Djibouti was because we have a military base there. And I knew it was for. It's like the worst kept secret in the world. That's our drone base for Yemen.
قاعدة الدرونات الأمريكية في الشرق الأوسط في جيبوتي. قاعدة الدرونات الأمريكية في الشرق الأوسط في دولة بيقول لك إنها عربية وبتاع، في جيبوتي. درونات بتطلع تضرب في اليمن من جيبوتي، وتضرب في الشرق الأوسط من جيبوتي.
Yemen, right? It's only 16 miles across the water from Djibouti to Yemen. And Yemen was, at the time that I was last there, was one of the headquarters of Al-Qaeda. So this was a base built by the French back in the 60s. Camp Lemonnier, it's called. So, like, you see guys in the French Foreign Legion, they wear these stupid, like, short shorts. and these funny hats, and they're walking around. They're always in pairs, walking around town in their little shorts. And so I went to the base, and all I see is Chinese. And I said to the military guy that I was working with, I thought this was a French base. Like, and we had part of it. He said, oh, no. He said, the French sold it a couple of years ago. I said, they sold it? Not to the Chinese. He goes, yeah, it's the only foreign military base that the Chinese have. And they share it with the U.S. military. How crazy is that? So, you know, what else was funny at the time?
القاعدة التي في جيبوتي قاعدة فرنسية مبنية من الستينات، عشان تعرف ان جيبوتي دي اصلا مش دولة. وده دايما بيخلي لك الدول الصغيرة دي عشان يتحكم فيها. عشان كده الاسلام قال لك تبقى ايه؟ دولة عظمى. الدول الصغيرة بنت المتناكة دي ملهاش لازمة. ليه؟ دولة صغيرة ضعيفة ما تعملش حاجة، يقوم اي واحد جاي من بره يقول لهم هات ودي، ويستخدم الارض بتاعته ضدك، في مقابل ان خول فيهم هيقف في الحكم. شوف بقى مين الخول اللي ماسك جيبوتي دلوقتي، يبقى خول شرموط ابن متناكة. لذلك ممنوع منعا باتا ان انت تسيب اي مكان خالص يسمي نفسه دولة اسلامية يقعد في دولة اسلامية، اديله بالجزمة على طول. فبقول لك كان بيروح هناك، فكان الفرنسيين بيبقوا قاعدين هناك. اخر مرة راح لقى الصينيين هناك، فبيكلم الراجل بتاع الملحق العسكري بيقول له مش الفرنسيين هنا؟ قال له لا، ما هم باعوها للصينيين، وهذه القاعدة الوحيدة المعروفة يعني للصينيين خارج الصين، والصينيين بيستخدموها، الموجودة في جيبوتي وامريكا جنبه.
And I made a joke about it with the guy. There's literally a chain link fence that goes down the middle of the base. So on the left side is Chinese, and on the right side it's American. So and it's just a row, as far as the eye can see, a row of hangars with this fence going down the center of it. And on the left, all the hangars are open.
The Chinese side?
Uh-huh. They're all open. And on the right, the American side, all the hangars are closed. And I said, why are the hangars closed? What do we have in there? And he goes, come on, dude. I go, oh, I know what we have in there. I'm just pulling your leg.
Drones?
All drones.
Oh my God. That's interesting. So what do you think the communication is between Russia and Iran trying to with Israel being in the middle of all this? Are they, what do you think they want to see happen with this conflict?
If you recall, on October 7th and October 8th, virtually the first thing that came out of the Israeli government as soon as hostilities began was, you need to help us bomb Iran. The Iranians did this. The Iranians are behind it. They gave Hamas the weapons. They gave Hamas the money. And the Iranians came out and said, look, we had nothing to do with this. And then the White House leaked some intelligence saying the intelligence community is unable to confirm allegations that the Iranians were behind the Hamas.
بدايات في حد موجود هنا يترجم يا جماعة فوري؟ عشان بس انا لما بترجم وارجع.
السلام عليكم.
انا سمعت الحتة اللي فاتت.
هو اعتقد انه اللي فهمته كان يتكلم على سياج بين منتصف القاعدة.
لا القصة، لا سيبك من السياج ده تفاصيل. بقول لك القاعدة الأمريكية في جيبوتي، القاعدة الأمريكية بتاعت الدرونات بتاعت الشرق الأوسط كله في جيبوتي، كلها درونات. دي اللي بتضرب اليمن وتضرب كل المناطق في الشرق الأوسط. والقاعدة دي كانت تبع فرنسا، مبنية من الستينات.
صحيح.
ودلوقتي آخر مرة راحها بيقول لك لقيت الصينيين هناك. فبيسأل الراجل بيقول له الصينيين هنا ليه؟ قال له ما فرنسا ادوها فرنسا ادوها للصين. فرنسا ادوا الجزء بتاع الصين لأن فرنسا انسحبت من جيبوتي. فلقى القاعدة مقسومة اتنين، نص أمريكي ونص صيني. هم قاعدين هناك في جيبوتي. الصين بتعمل ايه هناك ما حدش عارف بقى. المهم ان في القاعده هناك، والقاعده الامريكيه في جيبوتي. دي المعلومه اللي هو بيقولها. لا وبعدين قال انت كنت مش موجود، كان قال ايه؟
كان يتكلم اعتقد على 7 أكتوبر، انه لما صدر عن الحكومة الإسرائيلية.
لا هو لسه هيتكلم دلوقتي على 7 أكتوبر. بيقول لك انه الصين بدات تتدخل. بقول لك الحرب بتاعت الشرق الاوسط دي مع الصين مش روسيا. الصين بدأت تتدخل في الشرق الأوسط، روسيا موجودة ولكن روسيا لسه بعيد. الصين اللي عندها بلان جامد جدا للشرق الأوسط، والصين هي اللي دخلت عشان تعمل سلام بين إيران والسعودية. فأمريكا لما شافت كده قالت الرد بتاعنا على الصين، الكلام ده قبل 7 أكتوبر، الرد بتاعنا على الصين إن إن السعودية تعترف بإسرائيل، وهم دول اللي زائين بقى تركي آل الشيخ والكلام ده كله عشان يعملوا بقى البتاعة دي، عشان يدخلوا بقى احنا شايفين يا جماعة احنا بقينا حلوين اهو، احنا بندلع زي الامارات اهو، هندخل نطبع. ف
ايوه، بس في ملاحظه مهمه انا هيك جذبت انتباهي اخر كلامه. ما بعرف اذا انت انا ركزت فيها هذه لما قال على الايرانيين يعني بعد احداث 7 اكتوبر انه يعني عندما بدأ يقول لأنه الإيرانيون هم من يقفون وراء ذلك وزودوا حماس بالأسلحة. هذا
لا
حتى
لا لا
أنا
لا لا لا
الكلام
لا لا
زمان.
لا ما قالش كده، بيقول لك هو
لا
لسه
هو لسه أنا ما خلصت هيك. هو هكذا ينشر، هكذا إيران تقول. فقد زودوا حماس بالأسلحة وأعطوا حماس المال، ثم خرج الإيرانيون وقالوا انظروا ليس لنا أي علاقة بهذا. ثم سرب الآن الكلام أنا هذا اللي جذب انتباهي. ثم سرب البيت الأبيض بعد المعلومات الاستخبارية اللي تقول إن أجهزة الاستخبارات عاجزة عن تأكيد المزاعم التي تفيد بأن الإيرانيين هم من يقفون وراء ذلك.
لا طيب.
هذا آخر شيء قالوا وجذب انتباهي.
ماشي. الراجل ده خارج CIA من حوالي سنة، الراجل ده خارج CIA من حوالي 8 سنين تقريبا، فما اخدش منه معلومات جديدة. هو بيقول لك اللي حصل، هو بيشرح اللي حصل دلوقتي من وجهة نظره، ما عندوش، انما الحتة الأخرانية دي بتاعت 7 أكتوبر ما عندوش معلومات مخابرات، يعني هو بيفسر يعني بناء على الكلام القديم. هو لسه هيدخل دلوقتي في حته قديمه مهمه في حتات حرب العراق، هيقول لك فيها شويه معلومات خطيره. هو دلوقتي بيقول لك انه يعتقد انه حماس لما عملت القصه دي، هو قصده يقول يعني امريكا مش عايزه تضرب ايران، اسرائيل اللي بتزقها عشان تضرب ايران. فهو خليه يكمل وبعدين نخلص
mass attack, which is true. The Iranians didn't do this. The Iranians probably hoped it was going to happen, and are glad that it did happen.
But we put our foot down. And wow.
Because ever since George W. Bush was president, Benjamin Netanyahu has begged us to attack Iran. He's begged us, literally. I mean, I won't go into the details, but he's begged us multiple times. And we're not willing to go to war with Iran, just, as a favor to the Israelis. And so
that's shocking.
He thought that he could pull us into it on the 8th of October. And we said, no, our intelligence is not coming to the same conclusion that yours is. Well, there was no intelligence that the Iranians were involved. So the Iranians know that the Russians are preoccupied right now, which is, I think, what the Israeli calculation was. The Israeli calculation was probably, look, the Russians are bogged down in Ukraine. If we can convince the Americans to hit the Iranians, even if it's just by launching cruise missiles, that's going to help us a lot. But then the Chinese are like, whoa, wait a minute. We have good relations with the Chinese, and we don't have any intelligence. I mean, the Chinese with the Iranians, and we don't have any intelligence to show that the Iranians were involved.
China doesn't have any intelligence.
China doesn't.
Right.
And so we backed off. The Russians probably, were like, whew, that was a close one. And the Chinese are like, look at us and how powerful we are in the Middle East all of a sudden. And I'll tell you one other thing that the Chinese have really done right. Here we are
بتقعدوا في كل الغرف، هنترجم الحته اللي فاتت دي بس خلينا نسمع الدقيقه دي. بتقعدوا في كل غرف يقول لك الحضاره الامريكيه والحضاره مش عارف ايه، ولو الامريكان مسكوك ولو الصينيين مسكوك. اسمع بقى بتاع CIA بيقول لك ايه، اسمع بتاع CIA بيقول لك ايه، بتاع CIA اسمع بيقول لك ايه عشان تعرف ان انت اللي بيضحك عليك المهاجر البائس مش CIA. والله CIA دول طلعوا طيبين. اسمع.
spending all this money on military systems and hardware, right? And what are the Chinese spending their money on? ports, highways, hospitals, airports, loans to poor
This
countries.
is the Belt and Road.
It's brilliant.
And is it true that all of these airports and train stations and embassies that they're building and cargo ports all over the world, that these things can be converted into Air Force bases in the matter?
No. I'll give you as an example. When the Greek economy collapsed in 2008, it took, actually yesterday, Standard & Poor's upgraded Greek bonds to investment grade for the first time since 2008. So it's taken this long, from 2008 to 2023. And in that time, the Greeks really, really, really needed the money. And so they sold the port of Piraeus to the Chinese. The port of Piraeus is the biggest cargo port in the world. And they sold the port of Thessaloniki and the port of Iraklion, Crete, right, which is the biggest port in the Aegean. They sold all three ports to the Chinese. It killed them to have to do it. But for the first time, all three ports are profitable.
Wow.
See, for the Chinese, it's all about good relations. It's all about good relations, and they buy good relations. You need money? No problem. What do you need? You need a new hospital? We can do that for you. You need to upgrade your airport? Oh my God, your airport looks like it belongs in Africa. We'll give you a new airport. Oh, you need a highway to go from Athens to Thessaloniki because the mountains are so high. You don't have the money to blow the tunnels. We'll do it for you. No problem. And they do.
Now, can you explain to me? I have a loose understanding of it, but can you explain what the BRICS is?
بيقول لك الصين لا تريد الاحتلال زي ما امريكا عاوزه تحتلك. CIA اللي بتقول. عشان كده بقول لك لا تسمع للمهاجر البائس لهبل وراجل عبيط يقول لك هل تريد ان تعيش في الصين ام في امريكا؟ يا ابني كس امك. ايه اللي دخل دي في دي؟ عشان تعرف ان هو متخيل. الراجل بتاع CIA بيقول لك ايه بقى؟ بيقول لك اللي احنا بنعمله، السياسه اللي احنا بنعملها غلط. انت الامريكا بتصرف عشان تخوف الحكام بتاع الدول الصغيره واسلحه وناخد بالجزمه وهي كده. الصيني ما بيصرفش على القصه دي. الصيني بيصرف على الموانئ والمطارات والحاجات اللي بتنفعك وبتنفعك. فبيقول لك فالراجل بيقول له ما هم في ناس بتقول ان هم بيعملوا الكلام ده عشان يحولوها بعد كده قواعد عسكريه. قال له مفيش كلام من ده. قال له دولة اليونان في 2008 كانت مفلسة، فاضطر عشان يجيب فلوس، اوروبا ما ادتلوش الفلوس الكفايه، اضطر انه يبيع ثلاث موانئ من عنده للصينيين. فباع 3 موانئ، اعتقد حق ايجار طويل الامد يعني، والصين بيشغلوا الموانئ بتاعت اليونان، والموانئ بتجيب ارباح لليونان وبيقسموها معاهم. فكره ان الصين تريد احتلالك هذه فكره خاطئه. انا عشان انا ما بقولش اهو. CIA الراجل بتاع CIA اللي بيقول لك القصه اللي الناس هم بيدخلوها في دماغك بقى شويه الخولات. الصين جايه تحتلك. لا، ولا احتلك ولا عاوز يحتلك في حاجه. يقول لك ده الصين هيبعتوا لك ناس تاخد ولا عاوز ياخد ولا عنده عشان ده الكلام اللي كنت بقوله لكم زمان. هو ما عندوش ايديولوجيه. عشان تاخدك لازم يبقى في ايديولوجيه يحببك فيها انت تؤمن بيها. هو ما عندوش ايديولوجيه. مفيش واحد بيقول لك انا عاوز ابقى صيني، ولا واحد بيقول لك انا عاوز اعمل زي الصيني، ولا البطل بتاعي الصيني، ولا فيش كلام من ده. الصيني عاوز يجي بيزنس، خلص الموضوع على كده. ما عندوش اي اهداف اخرى خالص. اسمع بقى من الراجل بتاع CIA. عشان كده المشكله بتاعت امريكا بقى عارفه ان هو لو دخل بهذه القصه ناس كتيره جدا هتحب تروح لهذا الموضوع، لانه لا يتدخل في الشؤون الداخليه للبلد من الناحيه الايديولوجيه، ومن الناحيه مش عارف الاحتلال بقى اللي هو بتاع الموجود ده مش موجود. الصين ما بتعملش كده.
هو بس يعني تعقيب تأكيد لكلامك لما قال إنه أعتقد في 2008 لما اليونان البنوك أو انهار الاقتصاد اليوناني في 2008، فالبنوك يعني الظاهر إنه قاموا يعني هذه الأزمة استغرقت وقت من 2008 إلى 2023، وكان اليونانيين بحاجة إلى مال، فإيش سووا؟ راحوا باعوا ميناء أعتقد اسمه بيريوس للصينيين، وهذا الميناء قال عنه هو أكبر ميناء شحن في العالم، وهو أكبر ميناء في بحر إيجا، اللي هو بحر إيجا اللي بنفذ على البحر المتوسط، اللي هو بحر إيجا بين تركيا وبين اليونان. فيقول إنه باعوا 3 موانئ، منها هذا ميناء بيريوس، وقال ميناء آخر اسمه سالونيك، وفي ميناء اسمه يعني في جزيرة كريت يمكن، أو يعني يمكن اسمه كريت أو ليون كريت أو هيك شيء يعني. بس هذا
Sure. There's NATO, then there's the BRICS alliance, right?
Yeah, so BRICS.
When we were gearing up for the Iraq War, I think you were sitting there.
ركز بقى تاني، دي معلومة بقى اللي جاي، لا يقول لك معلومة دلوقتي عن موضوع غزو العراق، لأنه كان قاعد معه، قاعد في المكتب ويشرح لك التفاصيل. لازم تفهم هذه القصة كويس جدا لأنها تعاد الدروس المستفادة. ركز.
In a televised meeting, you were supposed to take notes, and somebody said something about invading
Iraq. And I was the note taker in a secure video teleconference. It was only George Tenet, who was the CIA director, and me. And then on the screens was the vice president and his note taker. Condi Rice was the national security advisor and her note taker. Colin Powell, Secretary of State, and his note taker. Don Rumsfeld and his note taker. A couple of other people, the head of NSA, the head of CENTCOM, and their note takers. And so our job is done as far as CIA goes, right? And starting tomorrow morning, it's his military operation. So George is just sitting there at the table with his hands folded. There's a microphone in front of him. And the vice president, being the senior officer in the meeting, is chairing the meeting. And he starts by asking the commander of CENTCOM, General, I forget his name now, to give us a briefing. So I'm sitting directly behind George. This is like the story of my life. I'm always the note taker. I'm always the guy sitting behind the important guy, right? So I'm taking notes, and I think I mentioned to you, I hate military analysis.
You gotta be a fast writer, too.
A very fast writer. In fact,
do you like abbreviate?
Yeah.
Okay.
And one of my trainers actually commented on it one time. He said, "You take notes at a wicked pace." I said, "Oh, thank you." Anyway, I'm taking notes, and I hate military analysis. It's so boring and mind-numbing to me. The general's got this big map, and he's like, elements of the 1st Infantry Division are moving south to this village, and then elements of the 5th Army Corps, and we've got the unit, this battalion. I don't know what the fuck he's talking about, so I'm just writing it all down. And then he says, if all goes as planned, we can be in Tehran by August. And George is just sitting there like this. And then he very discreetly turns the microphone off, and he turns around and he says, "Did he say Baghdad or did he say Tehran?" And I said, "He said Tehran."
And who was it that said that again?
The commander of Central Command.
Okay.
4-star general who's leading the troops across the border the next day.
Got it.
And George said, "Have these people lost their minds?" And then he turns the microphone back on and just sits there. So the meeting goes for about an hour. Everybody's like, "Good luck tomorrow, everybody. Good luck, USA," that kind of thing. So I go back to the office. I was working for the deputy director at the time. And he said,
who was the deputy director again?
Jim Pavitt.
Yeah.
And he said, "How'd the meeting go?" And I said, "Did you know we were going to invade Iran?" And he goes, ooh, are they still talking about that? And I said, yeah. I said, Singh brought it up. Singh, Commander-in-Chief CENTCOM. Singh brought it up. And he said, listen, they're not going to invade Iran. These people don't understand anything about the region. They think we could just, walk in and everybody's going to be milk and honey. Nobody's invading Iran. And of course, it was never mentioned again.
Wow. That's
غزو العراق بيوم هو كان قاعد في اجتماع مع جورج تينت وهو معاه بياخد النوتس، ونائب الرئيس كوندريزا رايس، كولين باول، رامزفيلد، ورئيس المنطقة السنترال كوماند، المنطقة الوسطى ولا المنطقة
اسمه ايه اللي بيتكلم يا ادم؟ ضابط المخابرات ده
هبقى ابعت لكم اسمه على بتاع.
ماشي.
ورئيس السنترال كوماند ومعاه النوت تيكر. فهو قاعد، فالراجل قاعد بيشرح بقى الخطة العسكرية وبتاع، هو بياخد النوتس. فبيقول لك واذا مشى كل شيء حسب الخطة هندخل طهران مش عارف يوم كام. فبقول لك جورج تينت قفل الميكروفون وبيقول له هو قال طهران ولا بغداد؟ قال له قال طهران. قال له الله يخرب بيوتهم، معنى الكلام الله يخرب بيوتهم، ده رئيس السي اي اي بيتكلم على بتاع الميليتري. وبعدين بعد كده راح المكتب، فالراجل هناك اللي هو الديبيوتي دايركتور اللي هو بتاع السي اي اي بيقول له الاخبار الاجتماع ايه؟ قال له ده بيتكلموا على طهران. قال له المساطيل دول لسه بيتكلموا على طهران. هو عاوز يوصل لك انه الناس اللي بتوع الجيش دول غنم، ده ولا هو فاهم اي حاجه، مش فاهم التفاصيل بتاعه المنطقه ولا عنده، والسي اي شايفاهم حمير. عشان كده هو هيقول لك بعد كده ان السي اي اصلا كانت ضد الموضوع ده كله وحذرتهم كلهم، وهم ما بيفهموش. اسمعها منه اهي.
so wild. It was just to be a fly on the wall for these meetings.
I remember one of the other attendees. I don't want to say his name, but he was the senior director at the National Security Council. I didn't like this guy from the get-go because he was so arrogant and he would put people down. He would put our allies down. He was especially harsh with the Kurds. We used to have Kurds come to Washington all the time for high-level meetings, and I was often the note-taker, or sometimes I would escort them to the meetings. And this guy always talked to them like they had half a brain, and, it was just insulting. So anyway, Singh Sen's giving the briefing, and this guy chimes in and he says, they're going to throw flowers at us as soon as we cross that border. And I said to my boss afterwards, I said, has this guy never been to the Middle East? Has he never read history? Do none of them understand what we're getting into tomorrow? Throw flowers at us? They would rather live under Saddam Hussein than to be occupied by the American army.
And so when you guys were leading up to the Iraq war, what was the CIA's stance on this?
Oh, yeah. So when I was first read into the compartment, it was about, let me think, June, July, August, September, October, November. It was about 8 months before the invasion. They said, look, we're going to invade Iraq. We're going to overthrow Saddam Hussein. We're going to do this and do that.
And there was some con man who was involved in giving
Ahmed Chalabi.
Yes, Chalabi, that's what it was.
Ahmed Chalabi, major con man. When I was first read into the compartment, I said, are they nuts? We haven't caught bin Laden yet. Like, this is all we ever talked about. We got to find bin Laden. We got to kill bin Laden. Now all of a sudden we're going to attack Iraq. For what reason? Iraq hadn't done anything to us. And this senior officer that read me into the compartment, very senior officer, he said, look, the decision's already been made and the battle lines have been drawn. This is in answer to your question. He said, the battle lines have been drawn. He said, the pro-war faction is OVP, the Office of the Vice President, OSD, the Office of the Secretary of Defense, and NSC, the National Security Council. He said, the anti-war faction is the State Department, the CIA, and the Joint Chiefs.
3 مع حرب العراق و3 ضد، والقرار جاء من فوق. اللي كانوا ضد كانوا السي اي اي الستيت ديبارتمنت وزارة الخارجية التشيفز، واللي كانوا مع كانوا الرئاسة ووزارة الدفاع والحاجة تانية. المهم يعني كان في 3 مع و3 ضد، عشان تعرفوا ان الموضوع كانوا. وبيقول انه CIA
And we've lost. Wow. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was crystal clear. This was all on Dick Cheney and Don Rumsfeld. All of it. And to a lesser extent, Condi Rice, because she was very easily pushed around.
Mm.
Yeah.
And so can you explain Chalabi?
Yeah.
أحمد شلبي ده، إن أحمد شلبي ده اسمع من CIA. أحمد شلبي ده هو الدور اللي عاوز يلعبه مين؟ محمود وهبة. بص بقى CIA لما تعاملت مع أحمد شلبي العراقي. اسمع أبو أنس، دي معلومة بقى لأنه كان جوه.
How was he instrumental in all of this? He was like robbing people out of their money. He created like a fake bank at one point. And did Cheney know?
Oh, of course he did.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes it an even more interesting story.
Yeah.
So Ahmed Chalabi was one of those very rare Shia Kurds. There are like, 6 of them, right? He was born in Iraqi Kurdistan, but his family was Shia Muslim. Very, very unusual. He was a bright kid, and so his parents sent him to London to get degrees in finance at the London School of Economics. He ended up moving to Jordan before Saddam became the leader of Iraq. He moved to Jordan and opened a bank there that he called Petrobank. And Petrobank succeeded because Chalabi was able to convince Iraqi refugees to use it as their bank, right? So if you were Iraqi, Petrobank was your bank. You didn't bank anywhere else. So that lasted from the 60s through the 70s through the 80s. And then at the end of the 80s, he literally stole all the money, $30 million in deposits, and his secretary smuggled him into Syria in the trunk of her car. He had transferred the money to secret accounts in London and Geneva, and then escaped to Syria and then flew to London. He owned a magnificent townhouse in Knightsbridge, London, right by Harrods. Magnificent. Today would be worth, $50-60 million. He wore suits that I could only fantasize about affording. But there was something very dirty about him. He was just an awful human being. And he would come on to every female officer that we would go out there and meet with him with. He was just disgusting. So in 1990, Iraq invades Kuwait. And George H.W. Bush says, we got to get rid of this Saddam Hussein. 1990. Well, you can't just overthrow a foreign leader and not have a plan for the next day. And so he said, well, we need to identify somebody that we can install as the new president of Iraq. Well, everybody liked this guy Chalabi. Why? Why do you think people would really like Chalabi more than everybody else? He spoke English. He spoke English as well as you and I. Everybody else is like, if they spoke English, it was heavily accented. They had BO. They didn't shave all the time. But Chalabi, he wears $2,000 Italian suits. He speaks English. He smells nice. Yeah, we like him. We like Chalabi. So the CIA engaged a private contractor by the name of the Rendon Group in Washington, headed by John Rendon. I love John Rendon. Awesome guy.
What kind of contractor?
He's a propagandist. You know, he said to me one time, I said to him, well, what does that mean, actually, that you're a propagandist?
This he's a self-proclaimed propagandist? Oh, nice.
And he said, you remember the day that we liberated Kuwait? And I said, I'll never forget it, as long as I live. I went into Kuwait with the Marines on Liberation Day.
Oh, wow.
And he said, everybody in Kuwait was waving a little American flag. I said, yeah, it was like a dream. He goes, where the heck do you think they got all those little American flags? What, they're just laying around?
Wow.
I was like, oh my God, I didn't even think of that.
No way. That's wild. This is a CIA contractor.
يا سامح. CIA بتتعاقد مع ناس بيسموهم بروباجاندست، بيعمل بروباجندا يعني. ده شغلته، بيعمل بروباجندا، عامل شركه بروباجندا. CIA بتقول له احنا عاوزين نعمل كده، وتديله 10 مليون دولار يروح يعمل البروباجندا. فبقول لك الواحد منهم اللي هو جون ريندن ده، اللي هم هيتعاقدوا معاه عشان يظبطوا شلبي، لسه دي هنجيلها. فهو بقول لك قصه خارجيه يعني. بقول لك بيسال الراجل ريندن يعني ايه بروباجاندست. قال له فاكر لما دخلنا الكويت والكويتيين شايلين العلامه الامريكيه؟ قال له قال له العلامه الامريكيه دي جت منين؟ هم كانوا هنا في الشارع، احنا اللي مديناها. CIA اللي مدي للكويتيين العلامه الامريكيه الصغيره اللي كانوا بيعملوا بيها الامريكان. والCIA كانت مشغله مجموعه عشان تعمل هذه القصه اسمها ذا ريندن جروب. شلبي، راجل شلبي ده لما سنه 90 لما صدام دخل الكويت، فبوش قال شوفوا لنا اي حد من العراق نثق فيه يمسك لنا الكويت، يمسك لنا العراق قصدي. فقالوا له الوحيد اللي كان موجود اللي هم حبوه لانه كان بيتكلم انجليزي وريحته حلوه اسمه شلبي. شلبي ده قصته انه كردي شيعي، ودول عددهم قليله، الاكراد ليسوا شيعة، كردي شيعي. وبعدين كان راح درس في لندن عشان كده اتعلم انجليزي كويس. وبعدين راح الاردن، عمل بنك اسمه بنك بتراء، وبعدين اشتغل فيه بالنسبه للاجئين العراقيين ان هم يحطوا فلوسهم فيه. اشتغل فيه 20 سنه، وبعدين سرق الفلوس وهرب لسوريا، وبعدين هرب للندن وخد الفلوس كلها بتاعت الناس واشترى لنفسه. الراجل بيقول لك احلى بيت ممكن تتخيله جنب هارودز في لندن، نايت بريدج، وبيلبس بدل اقل بدله. الراجل بتاع السياسة بيقول لك انا ما احلمش البسها، وعايش عيشه الملوك. وهو ده اللي هم كانوا جايبينه وعارفين كل القصه دي عنه. هو ده اللي هم كانوا جايبينه يمسك عشان بس كان بيعرف يتكلم. الناس التانيين بقى كان صعوبه المش عارف ايه والكلام ده كله.
وعلاوي كان مع علاوي نفس الحمد، الدكتور عادل علاوي رئيس وزراء العراق
ما
السابق،
هيجيب
كان
سيرته
برضه من لندن.
فهو ده شلبي. فقالوا عاوزين شلبي، فودوه للبروباجاندست ده، قالوا له عشان يظبطك يعني. شايف القصه بتمشي ازاي؟ بروباجاندست CIA بتديها لشركه بروباجندا، شركه اعلانات عشان تنشر له حاجات في البتاع وحاجات. اسمع بقى شركه البروباجندا عملت
ذكر كمان، ذكر لانه من يعني سرق من البنك بتراء،
سرق البنك كله، خد البنك كله.
تقريبا.
لا البنك خد الفلوس كلها حولها للندن.
ايوه، ذكر 30 مليون دولار هذه الودائع اللي في البنك، وهربته سكرتيرته الى سوريا في صندوق سيارتها اللي حول الاموال اليها، وكانت عبارة عن حسابات سرية في لندن وجنيف، ثم هرب إلى سوريا ثم طار إلى لندن.
لا بس في حاجة تانية يا مؤنس، البطيخي خد فلوس منه وساعد في تهريبه. البطيخي تعرفه؟
لا ما.
البطيخي رئيس المخابرات الأردنية السابق، جنرال.
فقال كمان يمتلك منزلا رائعا في نايتس بريدج بلندن بجوار هارودز.
ده ب 12 مليون جنيه استرليني ايام.
فهذا سابقا. اليوم هيك قال اليوم يسوى حوالي 50 أو 60 مليون دولار. بعدين قال كان يرتدي بدلات لم أستطع أن أتخيل أنني أستطيع تحمل تكلفتها. لقد كان مجرد إنسان فظيع، وكان يغازل كل ضباطه نخرج إلى هناك ونلتقي بهم، كان مثير للإشمئزاز.
بيقول لك يعني لما السي اي بتبعت له حد، اي بنت يشوفها يتحرش بيها، اي بنت يشوفها في المقابلات يتحرش بيها.
بس في نقطة تسجيل السابق انه ذكروا الى انه هذا على موضوع غزو العراق، ذكر الى انه يجب ان نقتل بن لادن، وهو في لما البداية قال سنهاجم إيران، أو بعدين قال أقصد العراق. فاللي كان المؤيد للحرب مكتب نائب الرئيس تبع جورج بوش، ومكتب وزير الدفاع، ومجلس الأمن القومي. أما الفريق يعني هذول الثلاث جهات. أما الفصيل المناهض أو المعارض للحرب كان وزير الخارجية والCIA وكالة المخابرات المركزية وهيئة الأركان المشتركة. يعني هيئة الأركان المشتركة الجيش الأمريكي، صح؟ هاي يعني غريب، يعني كيف يعني إذن الأمر نفذ من الرئيس، يعني لا وزارة الخارجية استطاعوا يوقفوا الحرب، ولا CIA، ولا هيئة الأركان المشتركة اللي هو الجيش. هي اللي أنا كمان نقطة
هو ضدها، مش معناه ان انت بتنافذ، انت بتقول رأيك، في الاخر هم بيقولوا القرار كذا نفذ. القرار ده بيجي من الرئيس والكونجرس،
حتى لو الجيش كان معارض.
نفذ على طول، لازم تنفذ. هيكمل لك القصة بقى، اسمع شلبي.
So they picked Chalabi. So John Rendon flies to Vienna, Austria, meets up with Chalabi, and John says, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to create this new group called the Iraqi National Congress. And what it's going to be representatives of all the different Iraqi opposition groups, right? And you're going to be the chairman of the Iraqi National Congress. So when we finally move into Iraq, you're going to be the president and everybody else will be your cabinet. Okay, that sounds like a decent enough idea. Several problems. Ahmed Chalabi hadn't even been to Iraq since 1965. We weren't even sure if he spoke Arabic anymore. Secondly, all the other people hated him. They're like, Ahmed fucking Chalabi, are you kidding me? Do you people not know who you're dealing with? The answer was no. At the time, we did not know who we were dealing with. The third problem is literally not a single one of these people on the Iraqi National Congress actually lived in Iraq. None of them. If Saddam thought that maybe, perhaps, someday you might possibly become an oppositionist, you're going to get a bullet in the brain. Mm-hmm. So there were no oppositionists inside Iraq, except the Kurds. And the Kurds are like, we're not working with any of these people. We're going to make Kurdistan, and we're going to live happily ever after. And that's where the oil is anyway. Mm-hmm. So the CIA started funneling money to the Iraqi National Congress, millions and millions of dollars. Okay, they need to buy a building. Where are we going to put this thing? We could put it in Vienna. We could put it in London. We don't want to put it in Washington. It'll be too closely tied to us. So we're trying to come up with different ways to do it. Maybe Vienna is the way to go. Okay, so he spent all the money and he needs more money. Okay, so we gave you $40 million. How much more do you need? Give me another $20 million. Okay, so what have you done with the first $40 million? I spent it. Yes, we know that. What'd you spend it on? All different kinds of stuff. Like what? Where's your building? You must have bought a building with $40 million. I know you bought a new friggin' house in London and a house in Geneva and a Mercedes S600. So where's the rest of the money? He couldn't account for a single dollar of it. Gone. So the CIA issued something called a burn notice. A burn notice is when you send a cable to every CIA officer in the world and say, don't ever have any contact with this person ever again. He's dead to us. Okay. That's what we did with Chalabi. So then for the
What
rest...
year was this again?
Pardon me?
What year was this?
By then it was like 92.
Okay, got it.
So then we pretty much forget about Chalabi through the 90s. You know, the Iraqis are sort of pissing us off because they won't let the UN inspectors go in, and then Clinton would bomb them, and then they'd do it again, and we'd bomb them again, and nothing was happening. It was just a stalemate. And then George W. Bush gets elected president, and 9/11 happens. And as soon as 9/11 happens, Bush says, we got to invade Iraq. It's their fault. 9/11's their fault. We're like, no, they had like literally nothing to do with 9/11. Well, we're going to invade them anyway. Okay, well, we think this is a mistake, but battle lines drawn, as I said earlier.
Was there no conversations, like real conversations with?
The only conversations were between Cheney, Condi Rice, and Rumsfeld, but mostly Cheney's deputies, Scooter Libby and Addington, and you know, all those guys. Khalilzad.
No one in the CIA could get in Bush's ear and be like, "Look,
we were absolutely preoccupied with Al Qaeda."
Got it. Okay.
Everybody in the building's working on Al Qaeda.
Okay.
And then Bush calls one day and says, "Oh, by the way, come up with an invasion plan because we're going to invade Iraq and overthrow Saddam Hussein." We're like, "What? What are you talking about?" But that was it. That was the order. So we decide to invade Iraq, and the CIA says, let's say we do invade Iraq and we overthrow Saddam Hussein. Then what? And Dick Cheney says, we're going to put this fella, Ahmed Chalabi, he's going to be the president. And we said, whoa, no, we are not.
Cheney said that.
Yeah, we have a burn notice on Cheney. I mean on Chalabi, and on everybody associated with Chalabi. We're not working with Chalabi. And then the CIA reissued the burn notice saying, listen, this is from 10 years ago, but just remember, we don't deal with this guy. So what Cheney did is he ordered the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence to secretly reopen a channel with Chalabi. And he specifically told him, don't tell the CIA. I remember, part of my job, or 90% of my job at the time, was reading 10, 15,000 cables a day, 20,000 that were coming in to brief the director. I'd boil that 10 or 20,000 cables down to a half a dozen of the most important issues to brief the director in the morning. And then we started getting these cables, like the weapons of mass destruction are located at these geo coordinates. I'm like, holy shit, who found this? Super secret, double secret probation kind of special source that nobody can know about. Well, this is a military cable. What sources does the military have? We're the ones that run the sources. Unless this is actually an intercept that they're disguising, which sometimes an intercept is so sensitive that they'll disguise it as something else.
What is an intercept?
NSA catches it out of the air.
Got it.
So I went to my boss. I said, do you know anything about this? You know who this source might be? And he's like, no, it's pretty explosive information. I said, yeah, it could end the war before it begins if we can send the UN inspectors in there. And then we started getting these every single day. Amazing, exactly on point intelligence. So a couple of our guys from the Iraq operations group said, we want to talk to the source. We don't care where he is in the world. We're going to fly a team out there and we want to interview the source. Pentagon said, absolutely not. Too sensitive. We said, no. We're the central intelligence agency, right? At the time, the head of the CIA, his title was DCI, Director of Central Intelligence. He was the DNI. He headed all intelligence agencies, not just the CIA. Now it's just the CIA.
Okay.
But the Pentagon refused to allow us to have access to the source. And then finally, after some pushing and prodding, they admitted it's Chalabi. And we're like, literally not a single word is true. Not a single word. We went to war for this. But people are dying because of this. And not a single word of it is true. And so nothing ever came of Chalabi.
Where's he now?
He died a couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago, in London.
Good Lord.
Yeah.
Did you see I saw on Twitter this morning, there was
قصة شلبي.
هو ادم هو جلبي بالجيم وليس بالشين.
ما هو مش بالجيم جلبي.
بالجيم بالجيم
جلبي.
الشلبي.
بيقول لك انه بعد القصه الاولانيه دي
العراقيين ينطقوها تشلبي بالشاء.
الشلبي عشان كده بقول شلبي. ظبطوا له بتاع الفريق بتاع البروباجندا ده، ادوا له 40 مليون دولار. ده اللي محمود وهب عاوز يعمله. ادوا له 40 مليون دولار، قالوا له هنعمل لك حاجه اسمها ناشونال الكونجرس العراقي، وانت تبقى الرئيس وتجيب الناس المعارضين في الخارج وتظبطوا نفسكم عشان لما نشيل صدام تدخلوا انتوا على طول.
لا ادم بس لا تشبيه غير صحيح بالمره. جلبي ده كان عنده علاقات في لندن، وكان عنده علاقات بالمخابرات ايام البنك، راجل وكان صغير في السن. هتجيبوا المحمود وهب 84 سنه جاهل ابن وسخه يا راجل خالص؟ نيفر. ولا الاداره الامريكيه.
ما انا بقول لك بيحاول
لا ده خاول ابن شرموطه ولا يتعين مدرس في مدرسه. 84 سنه مانس فاكت.
لو سمحت لي بتعليق يا استاذ ادم ايضا.
طب ادم بعد اذنك ممكن بس 10 دقايق الناس تاخد راحه تهضم الكلام ويتكلموا شويه بعد اذنك.
بس عشان نترجم الحته اللي فاتت دي عشان
كلم الحته اللي فاتت دي وانت خد راحه 10 دقايق كمان.
الراجل السي اي اي دفعت له 40 مليون دولار. جالهم بعد شويه قال لهم انا عاوز كمان 20. قالوا له ليه؟ قال لهم ال 40 خلصت. قالوا له عملت بيه ايه؟ اشتريت. قال لك الاول كنا عاوزين نعمل لهم مبنى، فقلنا خلي بالك بقى، خلي ركز، مش هنعمله في واشنطن عشان ما يبقاش له علاقه بامريكا. كل ده سري يا بيه، كل ده ساعتها كان سري في التسعينات. فقالوا هنعمله في فيينا، ويطلع بقى الواد يقول لك انا طالع من تحت السرير وهو سي اي اي. ادي دور الدول الاوروبيه الوسخه. لما كنت عملت لكم تسجيل عن دور السويد والدنمارك، دي اوسخ من امريكا بقى. دي امريكا بتستخدمها للالعاب الوسخه. يعني امريكا بتحط النظافه عندها وتحط الحاجات الوسخه في اوروبا. فقال لك عاوزين هنحطها في فيينا او لندن بس عشان يبقى بعيد عننا، يعني عشان ما حدش ياخد باله. السي اي دي 40 مليون دولار. فقالوا له عملت ايه؟ اشترى عربيه مرسيدس واشترى بيت قصر في فيينا وقصر في لندن تاني. فين الفلوس؟ مفيش. مش حاجات هبله بقى، ومفيش ولا عمل حاجه ولا اشتغل ولا جاب الناس ولا عمل اي حاجه خالص. فالسي اي حطته بلاك ليست، وعملوا حاجه اسمها بيرن نوتس، بعتوا نوتس لكل الناس بتوع السي اي محدش يتعامل مع ذلك الشخص نهائي، وخلاص. ونسوا موضوع شلبي ده في التسعينات لغايه ما جاء موضوع غزو العراق. ديك تشيني بيدور على اي حد عشان يحطه في العراق. فقال لهم انا ارجع شلبي ده. السي اي قالت له لا ممنوع. قال لهم هيرجع انا يرجع. وبعدين كلم الراجل السكرتير بتاعه انه يكلم شلبي بالسر من غير ما يقول للسي اي. فالسي اي قاعدين، وبعدين قبل الحرب بشويه شايفين كيبلز مراسلات جايه بتقول اسلحه الدمار الشامل في الحته الفلانيه، اسلحه الدمار الشامل في الحته الفلانيه، وديك تشيني طلع يقولها. فالسي اي بتقول له احنا بتوع السورسات، احنا بتوع المعلومات. مين اللي جاب المعلومه دي؟ قال لهم لا ده الرئاسه تقول لهم لا ده سورس جديد، نائب الرئيس ديك تشيني. ده سورس جديد، موضوع سري جدا ما نقدرش نطلعه، سري جدا ما نقدرش نطلعه. فلغايه ما المعلومات بدات تصل بقى بالحاجات بقى يعني واضحه جدا، بداوا داخلين على الحرب واستعدوا للحرب. الراجل بتاع السي اي كلم نائب الرئيس قال له لازم نقابل الراجل ده. قال له لا، لغايه ما الخناقه اتعملت. وبعدين اكتشفوا في الاخر انه شلبي شلبي اللي قاعد يالف لهم ونايم في البيت. شلبي اللي بيألف لهم كل المعلومات. طبعا هو ديك تشيني كان عاوز اي مصدر عشان يقول لهم يا جماعه، عشان هو عاوز يدخل العراق كده باي سبب من الاسباب يعني. وبعدين هو اللي اداهم كل هذه المعلومات اللي اتبنت عليها بعد كده.
لا بس ما تضحكش عليهم، هم عارفين ان المعلومات غلط. هم عندهم
لا ما هو ديك تشيني عارف، بس هو كان بيديها لكل الناس حتى بتوع الجيش انها معلومات صحيحه
بالظبط. وكولين باول في كتابه برضه اتكلم عن الموضوع ده. بالمناسبه انت خلصت ولا لا؟ ترجمه الجزء ده؟ طب كمل عشان هقول لكم حاجه على احمد الجلبي دوت.
لسه شويه عشان هقول لك في معلومه تانية على اسمه ايه.
بس اديهم راحه يا ادم، لو في عشان الناس تهضم بس 10 دقايق من راحه الناس تهضم بس.
هو
فيري ديسنت،
خمس دقايق
معلومات كويسه.
5 دقايق وهيخلص.
There's a video of Liz Cheney talking about how Trump's going to lead us into a dictatorship.
No, please. Her father led us into a dictatorship.
I was going to say that's it's a one hell of a thing for a Cheney to be giving us a lesson on dictatorship.
Seriously, right? None of those people from the Iraqi National Congress ever amounted to anything. In fact, only the Kurds ended up running government. Jalal Talabani, the head of the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan, ended up being the president of Iraq. And I'll tell you something funny. In my office a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about Iraq, and my co-host on my radio show said something about Barham Saleh, and I said, "Oh, what's Barham doing?" And she looks at me. She said, "He's the president of Iraq." I said, "Barham Saleh is the president of Iraq? He was my main partner during the Iraq war. He lived in Annandale, Virginia. We had dinner at each other's house every couple of weeks. We would go out. Our kids would play together." I said, "He's president of Iraq?"
اسمه ايه الواد العراقي ده؟ رئيس العراق السابق اسمه ايه؟ برهم صالح؟ برهم ولا اسمه برهم ولا برهم ولا اسمه ايه الخول ده؟ برهم صالح بيقول لك هو كان قاعد من يومين. برهم كان قاعد من يومين، فجت سيرته عشان تعرفوا كيف تتعامل معاهم CIA الرؤساء. فالراجل بيقول له هو برهم فين؟ قال له ده رئيس العراق. بيقول للراجل ده اللي بيتكلم، قال له برهم رئيس العراق؟ قال له اه. قال له الخول ده اللي كان قاعد معايا في البيت اللي جنبي وكنا بنطلع العيال يلعبوا سوا، برهم كان قاعد شغال مع CIA. شوف الايام فين. الراجل مش متخيل ان ده ينفع رئيس العراق. اتفضل بقى سامع، في شويه حاجات تانية بس بعدين.
ماشي تمام قوي. طبعا معلومات ده